Hi, we enter into 2 Samuel 18 today as the story of Absalom's rebellion in 2 Samuel 15 to 18 comes to a dramatic conclusion, not quite today, but in the next video as we'll see. So if you haven't been following these videos on this unit, I encourage you to look at the introductory video where we go over some of these elements on the right side of the screen, including the various elements of the literary style, the interpretive options that we'll come back to in just a moment, and the shape of the story where we are now in chapter 18 where the battle's about to ensue. I haven't been focusing on the interpretive options in the last few videos, but I want to come back to it again today because the character of David is exactly what's at issue in these first verses before the battle takes place. And when the battle takes place, it's done in a verse. It's very anticlimactic, as we'll see next time. The only thing that's exciting about it is Absalom's head being stuck in the tree. Spoiler alert if you didn't already know that. But what's at issue now is the character of David, because we've seen David throughout either acting slack, as the second option suggests, like he had no idea for 9 years that Absalom was fomenting rebellion just outside his window there, and had no idea, having been king, what was going on. Or that's not the case, because how could David, who has been so alert throughout his life, suddenly completely miss something that's so obvious right in front of him for year after year after year, which is suggesting that David is making this happen, and the authors of the text are presenting it this way so that David can get Solomon on the throne to please his Egyptian overlords who run this whole situation. And we haven't seen that explicitly yet, but we'll see it in the decorations of the temple that Solomon makes, and then we'll see it as Egyptians come up twice in immediately the generation after Solomon and raid the temple, and later, a couple of years later, assassinate the king Josiah outside of Jerusalem. So we do know that the Egyptians see Jerusalem and this little kingdom here as a colonial outpost for their own purposes, as it continues to be over the centuries for Babylon, for Persia, for the Greeks, etc., in that crucial geopolitical position in between Egypt to the south and Mesopotamia to the east. So that's one of the questions, is David letting this all happen? And yet we're going to see in this scene very mixed evidence of David's point of view. But as we look at that evidence, we have to recognize the text has already shown us back in 1 Samuel 29, when David is working for the Philistines, that he's capable of performing in a way that even the king of the Philistines thought that he'd gone mad and dismiss him. So we have to be prepared to consider that even things that look sincere on David's part may well be royal performance by David, the actual person, by the character in the story, or by the Deuteronomistic authors presenting it this way, as we'll see. So as we look at our scene here, we're going to see it's going to be focusing around Manahaim here, where David is. This is all taking place on the other side of the Jordan. And we won't see it this time, but we'll see next time when the battle actually ensues many parallels between the scene back in 2 Samuel 2, where very similar situation happens on the other side of the Jordan, framing the entire ministry here of David as king. And so we'll look at that more next time. And we've been continuing to look at all the various characters. We won't see new characters today, but we're just noting all the various characters lined up on David's side who are never described as the people of Judah, but simply as supporters of David. And we'll only see that way later in chapter 19. There's any concern when David talks to people known as the elders of Judah, but we've not seen anything about that throughout. This is all Israel, or the men of Israel in various contexts, against David and his personal supporters. So let's bring up our passage here, and we'll see, as we looked at last time, the chiastic shape of a number of these elements. Today we're looking at this scene here, which forms this nice tight chiasm around the framing of commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, and then the king saying to the men, and then the king responding to them after they object to his going out. And what's not framed by the chiasm is the poignant command of the king to his three leaders to deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. So with that in mind, let's jump right into our scene. So David mustered the men, or literally observed or attended to, but mustered is close enough, who were with him, and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, exactly like we were told kings would do back in 1 Samuel 8:12. And so we see that already as one of the implicit elements of what's going on here, that the authors, although they're praising David at one level, are not only suggesting there's something wrong about David's leadership, but something wrong about the monarchy itself. And there are a number of hints that we've seen already, and there'll be more of them as we go. So setting over them commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, matching that initial prediction. And then David divided his army, or literally let go his army here, And as my note on the verse has, this division reduces Joab's power, which perhaps is getting stronger than David could control, and shares it beyond the brothers of Zeruiah. And yet they are two-thirds of the leadership, highlighting the disingenuity of David's earlier disclaimers that are violence, and I could add the one that will follow about Abishai later. So let's look more closely at this. So he divided the army, or literally let go, as you can see, or sent out, as I put on this side, sent off the people. And on David's side, it's never army, it's always the people. Only Absalom's group is called an army. And the irony of that is that David's people here are a group of miscellaneous folks, including mercenaries, who are certainly have no purpose in the story other than to be an army. Whereas Absalom on his side is all Israel, which is certainly a people and has many purposes other than being an army. But that's what our text says, that David divided the people. Three groups is not in the Hebrew here. It's literally David sent them out, as you can see on the right side, 1/3 under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. Again, as so often, the New RSV leaves out body parts, which make it much more concrete. So hands and face and heads and things like that. So under the hand. And that's a metaphor we would use in our cultural context too, that somebody who's in charge is people are under their hand, or they have the hand of command. And yet, interestingly, Joab is as much a son of Zeruiah as Abishai. So why is it specifically focusing on Abishai as a son of Zeruiah? Is it expecting maybe we forgot him? But it wasn't very long ago. It was only at chapter 16 when he was offering to cut off the head of Sheba, calling him a dead dog. And David didn't chastise him directly there, but he did appeal to the notion that if Yahweh had inspired Sheba, then David didn't want to be fighting against Yahweh. Later, when Abishai wants to cut off another head, David will say, "You sons of Zeruiah are too much for me." And that's one of these questions. He said that multiple times, disclaimed their violence, including Joab's murder of Abner. And yet he's putting those people, when the chips are down, in charge of his situation, the people he's been able to rely on. And as many scholars, including Halpert and Bodner perhaps, also are suggesting maybe Joab really is too strong. Maybe Joab really is the hand behind the throne. Not that he wants the direct power, but he's the one making things happen. And we'll see that happen at the end of chapter 18, after Absalom is dead, when Joab chastises him in the strongest possible terms, as we'll see. And then he gives 1/3 under Ittai the Gittite, who we saw back in chapter 15, where David tested his loyalty, and Ittai assured him he was loyal. Is he just leading the 600? Well, we were told he set them over commands of thousands and hundreds, so we have to mostly assume that Ittai is in charge of more than just his fellow Gittites. In other words, this is an international coalition put together for the sole purpose of defending the person of David, and we'll see that more explicitly in just a moment. So now David proposes. The king said to the men here, as Ald notes, more intimate and more connected than those with him. It's one of the rare occasions where the No RSV reveals that, but there it is. The king said to the men, and as a number of scholars note, Ald in particular below, all the first person emphasis. I myself will also go out with you, and it's even doubled. Go out, yes, go out. So the first person pronoun, the emphasis, the also, he's insisting on it. As Ald notes below, David's insistence that he join the battle is triply underscored linguistically. The verb is doubled by use of the infinitive absolute, as I was just noting. The independent pronoun is used to stress the subject, and even that is further emphasized with the added also, the Hebrew gam. So he's absolutely insisting on it. But they say no. And it's interesting that that's the response that he will listen to. As my note below has, they perceive that it is the person of the king that is now important, not his role as a real leader. David, like a king in a chess game, stays behind while the pawns go forward in the battle. And the question I'm raising below is, was this also true at 11:1, when they went into battle and he stood on his roof looking out and seeing Bathsheba doing whatever it was she was doing there? If so, if that's true, then it suggests that David's sin was a direct result of his idleness, generated by an overly exalted view of the person of the king, on their part, not necessarily on his part. But they insist the other ways. You shall not go out. And it's interesting that they're giving orders to the king. Throughout, we have often heard people using the third person deferral form of speaking of themselves as your servant, and speaking to the king as my lord the king, rather than a second person is here. But this is direct speech, as if it's peer-to-peer, not as if they're deferring to the king at all. So you shall not go out. For if we flee, yes, flee doubled, not they will not care about us, but they will not put their heart out. Twice, which is a figure of speech in Hebrew that also works in English. To not put your heart out for someone is to not be concerned, and that's the point. That Absalom's people don't care about David's troops. It's all about getting David. It's Absalom versus David here. If half of us die, they will not put their heart out. But you are worth 10,000 of us. That matches what Ahithophel was suggesting to Absalom in 17:2. Why Ahithophel suggested Absalom not go in the midst as Hushai did, but Absalom will be in the midst, as we'll see momentarily. You are worth 10,000 of us. Is that meant to echo that David has killed his tens of thousands? That was the cry in the street that got Saul so jealous of him? Don't know, but they suggest he's worth everything. Therefore, it is better that you send help from the city. The word for help is ezer, as in ezer kenegdo in Genesis 3, the helper to put alongside that the woman will be for the man, not a helpmate, but an actual help. And from the city, which is, say, Manahaim, as they are. What help they'd get from the city, it isn't clear. They already have commanders over hundreds of thousands, but they're certainly saying that David should not be in this battle. And the king says to them, whether this is mysteriously or poignantly or in dejection, whatever is good in your eyes, not whatever is best to you. Another case where the NORSV leaves out body parts. And it's a figure of speech. It's regularly the case, whether it's in Yahweh's eyes or people's eyes, whatever is good in your eyes. But the point is, it should be whatever is good in Yahweh's eyes. We saw that earlier. We can look at it now in 1 Samuel 1:23 when Elkanah says to Hannah, do whatever looks good in your eyes. And yet then adds, may Yahweh establish his word. So at least Elkanah there is hoping that what his wife is going to do is consonant with Yahweh's word. But here, there's nothing about Yahweh at all. The king just says, whatever you think, I will do. Is that his weakness? Does he already know that? Is this for the audience to suggest that David is just a pawn of these people, even though they're the pawns and he's the king, if we continue the chess metaphor? It's not clear, and readers across the centuries have to decide. So the king stood at the side of the gate, not the gate of Jerusalem, where he'll be later, but the gate of Manahaim here, contrasting with 19:8, as you see below, where he'll be at the gate of Jerusalem. At the gate, which is the place for justice, where Absalom began the rebellion in 15:2, going down there, promising justice to people, and highlighting that David was absent from the gate, allowing Absalom to fill that need of the people for justice. Well, not the army, but the people marched out in hundreds and by thousands. So sitting there across the Jordan in Manahaim, watching his army go out with the goal of killing his son. And in that context, we hear this poignant verse outside the chiasm. The king ordered, and order is twice in the verse here, there and here, Joab and Abishai and Ittai, making clear it's going to all three of them. As Baden notes below, at almost every point where Joab appears, the biblical authors position him as the counter to David's desires. It was not David who wanted Abner dead, and it was not David who killed Abner. It was not David who wanted Absalom to return from exile, and it was not David who brought him back. So too here, it was not David who wanted Absalom dead, it was Joab. And as Baden's noting, that could easily be read as the continuation of the propagandistic view that this is all out of David's control. And yet, what is that telling us? You have a king whose warriors are outside of his control. Either way, it doesn't look good for either David or for monarchy. But what he says is this poignant statement. Deal gently, la'at there in Hebrew, which we'll see one more time. And my note below has in powerful contrast with Saul's reaction to Jonathan's defection. So when Saul was alienated from his son Jonathan, he called him terrible names. And yet now, having not seen or talked to Absalom except for a brief moment in over 9 years, this is what the king says. Deal gently with my sake, not with my son, not with the rebel king, but with the Na'ar, the young man. Absalom is certainly not still a young man after all this time. We don't know how old he is, but he's certainly not a young man. And yet, aren't children so often to their parents still their babies? We don't know that David is much of a father that way, and he has a number of other sons that we know nothing what all about. All those who gathered when Absalom gathered them for the sheep shearing that was the ruse for getting Amnon killed. And we certainly know that Solomon and Adonijah, among others, are still out there waiting to see what happens when the time for the succession actually arrives. But here it is calling him that. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders of Absalom. So that's being witnessed to, that the king's stated public purpose is to deal gently with Absalom. Does that mean to kill him softly? Does that mean to just take him captive? But in the end, Joab does what everybody knows has to be done if David is going to rule again from Jerusalem, which is to make sure that Absalom can no longer rebel against his king. We'll see how that happens next time. See you then. Bye-bye.